In its most recent incident study of missing children, the Department of Justice indicated that an estimated 200 to 230,000 children are abducted by a family member each year. Based on the Department of State's most recent annual report on international parental child abductions, we can estimate that for every 1,000 children who are abducted by a parent, 2 will be taken across international borders. The moments following the threatened abduction of a child by his or her parent, or once an abduction actually occurs, are both paralyzing and critical for a protecting parent. Once a child is abducted by his or her parent abroad, the U.S. loses its jurisdiction to facilitate the legal return of the child to his or her home. All hope is not lost, however. Various U.S. agencies, such as the Department of State, have offices and programs that may prevent an international parental child abduction from occurring, or assist a seeking parent with access to or the return of the child following a kidnapping event. We are joined today by Scott Renner, Director of the Office of Children's Issues, Bureau of Consular Affairs at the Department of State, to help us further understand the prevention programs and services that his office provides to families when a parental child abduction overseas is either threatened or actually occurs.
My name is Scott Renner, Director of the Office of Children's Issues. One of our key purposes is working on cases of international parental child abduction, both helping families that have been impacted and helping prevent them before they occur. It's something I feel strongly about, working with these families and trying to give them the help we can.
Along those lines of helping families, could you share a little bit of background about the Prevent Abduction program?
What we all want is to stop a child from ever being abducted in the first place. Even if we were able to recover a child, there's still damage, hardship, drama that occurs with that child. And so the happiest ending is when the child is never abducted to begin with. There's 2 key ways. One is a sort of maybe a more passive alert program, which we call the Child's Passport Issuance Alert Program, or CPIP. And what this is for anybody, they can send us the information. And what we do is we put an alert in our passport system. In all U.S. passport cases, 2 parent signature is required. But what the alert system does is it adds a level of protection, and our office will reach out. If there's an alert and a child applies for a passport anywhere in the world, any embassy or passport agency, anywhere, the alert will trigger, and we will reach out to the parent who put that alert in to say, are you aware that your child is currently applying for a passport in Morocco, in Los Angeles, in Toronto, in New York? Are you aware of this? Do you consent to this? It's possible the officer has already seen in that window in Toronto or New York a signed, notarized statement by that parent giving permission. But this is a level of protection to make sure that this is really what this parent intends.
Now, with the CPIP, can either parent enroll their child in that program?
Both parents can put them in the program. And it really does work. A story I'd like to share is like, for instance, I was doing a case in Bogota where a family came in, father and mother, and the alert came up. They had apparently worked things out, but the alert was still in the system. And so I said to the father, I said, well, I need to check on something. And I sent the email back to this program to say, we have this case. Now, it doesn't normally work this fast, I don't think, but as we were standing there, his phone rang. He pulled his phone out of his pocket. He said, excuse me a minute. And it was a lady who works in this office calling him to make sure that he knew he was standing in a window, that he said, yeah, no, I'm okay with it. I'm actually here at the embassy right now. No, this is good. Thank you. I'm talking to Scott right now. And then he passed the phone. I said, hi, Peg, how's it going? And we continued with the case. But, the idea is we want to double check if the parent really doesn't concur. And if the parent doesn't concur, then we go forward to see what do the custody orders say, then there's a process. But it's in that sense, a passive program. Tens of thousands of these alerts have been issued over the last several years, and we monitor that program.
And that program does not prevent the issuance of a passport, but it alerts the person who created the alert or requested the enrollment that this is happening. Yep. And if that person doesn't consent? Then
it would depend on the facts of that case. If both parents share full custodial rights and no emergency is presented, for example, then in all likelihood that would prevent issuance of the passport. If the parent who put the alert in, if there's a subsequent custody order that gave the other parent full custody, it might be a different analysis. But just make sure that there's no fraud involved, that this isn't happening without the other parents even their knowledge.
And does either parent have to have a reason for enrolling in this program?
You can have a perfectly happy marriage with, I've been married for 27 years. I still have a 16-year-old daughter. If I wanted to test out the program and put my daughter in it, I could.
And you mentioned another program. Could you speak more about that?
Yes, separately from that, there's a program that's really a CBP program, but we work very closely with them.
And CBP is?
It's Customs and Border Protection.
Thank you.
And part of the Department of Homeland Security. And they're responsible for the borders of the United States. and it's called the Prevent Abduction Program. And this is really a much more, I'd say, more active response program, and this is really designed to prevent abductions in progress. We always have a 24-hour duty officer that is on call to work with law enforcement to stop these cases in progress. And there's two different ways this may come up. One is people can enroll in this program. This is not for my marriage situation where I just want to get an alert. This is for someone who's in a situation where they're really concerned that an abduction might be imminent or even likely in their case, or they're fearful. It requires a court order that lays out that the child, may not depart the United States. And there's language on our website that, more specific. So there has to be a court order that specifically prevents where a U.S. court has made an order this child may not be taken out of the United States by one parent without the other's permission, for example. But with that information, working with CBP, and as I said, we have people working very closely with them, we can stop the child from leaving.
How?
CBP has the ability to stop them from boarding in a flight, to pull them off a flight at the gate if they're already on the plane, to actually stop them from leaving the United States. And there's, this happens in sort of two general ways. One is people have gotten this information in advance. We have many cases enrolled in the program, and they're just sitting there waiting with the custody orders already in our database in case the child does appear. Second would be we get an emergency call. An emergency call comes in and says, my husband's missing, the passports are gone, the kids are gone, and I'm worried they're on their way to the airport. If there's a court order, the judge has ruled they may not be taken out, call up CBP, we get with the airport officials at that airport, and we stop them from getting out. But a key component is that court order. Absent the court order, it doesn't work.
If a parent is unknowing that there is a threat of abduction and does not yet have a court order, but has reason to believe that the child and the taking parent are on their way to an airport, is there a means through law enforcement, be it state police or someone at intake through the NCIC, to also set an alert at the border?
For our program, for the Prevent Abduction Program, there must be a court order. We work on the civil side of these cases. Often there's a companion criminal side. And if there were, arrest warrants out for a parent or something like that, that's a separate criminal situation. And it would just depend on the facts of each individual criminal case, what the arrest warrants say or what the court's ordered in civil on a criminal side. But in this program, must be a court order.
Now, you talked a little bit about the success of the Child Passport Issuance Alert Program. Could you speak a little more about the success of the Prevent Abduction Program?
Dozens of cases in the last 2 or 3 years, and where we've been able to stop children who were en route to airports, in airports, even on planes, from leaving the United States. And one of the things about this program that's, I think, very important too, is I mentioned I was in the office earlier. In the last few years, this program has become public. In the past, we were able to work with CBP, but in a more informal way. Now this has been formalized. It's public. The information's links on our website to the CBP website with information about it. We can talk about it in interviews. So, so I think the program is vastly improved, because having a program you can't tell people about obviously isn't as effective as having a program that you can broadcast.
Can you speak specifically to the process to
Sure.
enroll in the Prevent Abduction Program?
Right. And the email I want to give is preventabduction1@state.gov. That's the email for all prevention type issues. Anytime, anybody can also call our number, 888-407-4747. During working hours, all my staff is accessible through that, and after hours, it's also monitored. But the core element of the Prevent Abduction Program is going to be the custody order. Obviously, the person has to show us some proof of parental rights. We don't want someone calling and saying they want to enter 300 or 400 kids in the Prevent Abduction Program who they don't know, but they thought they should stay in the United States. So there's other requirements related to that. Citizenship is not an issue. As long as the child's in the United States, we will work to prevent their abduction from the United States. But the custody order is the key element.
Let's say I have a custody order issued from the court, and I know about the Prevent Abduction Program. How do I get that custody order to you and then confirm that my child or children have been enrolled?
Preventabduction1@state.gov. That would be, as a link, would be the primary way to send us that information, and we would be confirming whether we've accepted it, whether it's gone in the program. The same would go for the CPIP program. Parents who are working with us on that passport issuance alert, through those emails, we get whatever paperwork we need, and we would confirm that we've received it, enter the child in the program. And again, I do want to reinforce the Prevent Abduction Program is a CBP program. We work very closely with them on it. We're happy to do the intake and the enrollment, but For additional information, people can also go to the CBP website, which, as I stated, now has public information available where they describe the program and the requirements.
And I'll note that there's also information available on returnushome.org. Are there other resources that OCI offers for families whose children have been parentally abducted abroad?
Yes, one of the things I like best about my job is we do have resources. There's about 60 people that work with me. We have human resources. These are all dedicated people who work here for a reason. They want to help either prevent abductions or help families recover children who are abducted. And that would be the most important message, would be if this happens, whether it's about preventing or whether it's already happened, call 888-407-4747. Don't suffer in silence. Don't say, well, my kid was taken to a country where I spent a lot of time and I know there's no hope. Or I talked to 5 people who said, I tried and I was unsuccessful. Don't waste your time. Please call us. Even if, and we're going to be honest, we're going to give the best information we can, both about, generally what our office can do and the specifics. Because, for example, one big division in the world is there are countries that are members of the Hague Abduction Convention, and there are countries that aren't. The current number, I think we have about 70 to 80 partners under the Hague Abduction Convention. Under the Hague Abduction Convention, there's a set process, and it works really well in some countries and not as well in others, but there is a process. And we play a role. We're the U.S. Central Authority for the Hague Abduction Convention. And what we do is we would work with the parents, explain the requirements, talk to them about the documents they need to fill out, whether they need translations or not, and what's needed. And it's basically an application, and the custody order is the key thing, or a birth certificate of the child, or things like that. We then will forward that on the behalf of the parent to the foreign central authority, to our counterparts in the foreign country. And they'll take it. At that point, if they agree that this meets the requirements of the convention, they will work then to get that in front of a court. It's a little different in each country. Some countries, they might provide a lawyer who will represent the case in court. Some countries do not. Some countries, and these are all things that the officer will help work with the parent on the specifics of that country. But then there's a case in court, and the case is pretty simple under the Hague Abduction Convention. A child was abducted from their habitual residence to a foreign country, and you file a Hague Abduction Convention case, the child should go back. Issues of custody and all that should be decided back where that child is habitually resident.
There is no necessity that prior to making an application to the Hague for a hearing that there is a custody order in play. There
must be, they must have parental rights, which were violated by the other parent, either abducting, and this is important, retaining the child wrongfully overseas. Because sometimes we see cases that are people showing up with ski masks, kicking in doors, grabbing kids, knocking down a parent. We also see cases where the parents seem to be getting along, and this year's trip to Brazil for vacation, the other parent just doesn't send the kid back. Even though you gave permission for that travel to Brazil, you weren't giving permission for permanent change of habitual residence, and so you can file in those circumstances as well. We just need the proof of custodial rights, which often is, a marriage certificate and state law that says parents are assumed to share custodial rights absent a court order. And then back to the Hague Convention. Now, there are certain defenses to the Hague Abduction Convention. For example, if a judge were to find there was a grave risk in returning a child to the country, or if a child has been present in the country for more than a year before the case even starts, the judge might find that the child is now well settled and it's not good to return the child. So there are some defenses, but that gets argued, in a foreign court.
So your office is not involved in the adjudication of the case, but just in assistance in application of the case.
We look at the case to make sure it meets the requirements. Rarely, but it happens, we'll get a case that simply does not. The person's not on the birth certificate, has no legal parental rights, and then we tell them what they need to do to get to that stage, for example. But no, we don't go and argue in front of the court, but we do send the cases. We constantly interact with the Foreign Central Authority to get updates. We have cases, I myself, because I'm a diplomat, I'm a foreign service officer who's served in, I think, 6 or 7 countries overseas. I've attended 20 or 30 Hague hearings in my career, where, when I don't go as the lawyer for the person, but I'm there as the U.S. Embassy representative. So sometimes when our resources permit or the case seems to warrant it, we'll send a foreign service officer to view the hearing, to participate. And so we're monitoring and observing and making sure things are moving as they should. We are not litigating the case on behalf of the parent or even taking sides. Sometimes 2 American citizens are involved in the dispute. We want to see an unbiased judge make a proper ruling under the Hague Convention.
So your role in these cases is strictly through observance once they've reached a court?
In the courtroom, yes. We do not stand in the courtroom and argue on behalf, right? At most, we'd be there observing. But we are, at all levels, pushing on these cases because parents, there shouldn't be delays, for example. If a case is going on for months and months or even years and years, that's hurting everybody involved. And so we will be urging through the central authority, through other government contacts, that the court move in an expeditious fashion to process these cases.
And are there other ways other than through the Hague Convention that your office can assist a family?
Yes. There's two other things I'd like to talk about on that note. First is there's unfortunately many countries that are not members of the Hague Convention. Those families should call us as well. I hope they will. We assist those families as well. We don't have the tool of the Hague Convention, but in some countries, there's, families will hire a private attorney and pursue a custody case in country, possibly pursue a case to recognize a U.S. court order in country. There's different ways you can litigate within a country. So even without the Hague Convention, that we have many cases we work on where families are pursuing return, and we sometimes get court-ordered returns from countries, even where the Hague Convention wasn't the legal standard that court was using.
So in those cases, what is the role of a country officer at the Department of State?
So some additional things I want to talk about. One of the reasons we're staffed the way we are is we want people who are experts in their countries. The country officer can give some of the information about what's happening. For instance, we put out a report every year, country page for every country in the world where we've had a case in the past year. It'll describe some of the problems we've seen, some of the resources available in that country. So the country officer is going to share that information. Separate from that, an important role we play for most parents, they want their child back. But while this case is going on, they have other concerns. They haven't seen their child for a long time. Their child's in a country maybe where that child's very uncomfortable and things are awkward. One of the things our embassies can do around the world is do what's called a welfare and whereabouts visit. And if a parent requests that dealing with their country officer, we go out, for a routine welfare and whereabouts visit. I use the word routine. I'll explain what would be different. We go out to the parent who's taken the child, wherever the child is. We ask them if we can visit. So for a routine visit, we do need the permission of the parent who's taken the child. They generally give it. I'd say more often than not, they give the permission. Again, we're not there as the agent of anybody. We just are the U.S. Embassy responsible for the safety and security of U.S. citizens overseas, and we want to visit this U.S. citizen child. And for that sort of, and I'll explain what we can do for non-citizens, but for a U.S. citizen child, so we sit, we talk to the child, we look at the home, we try to make sure the parent back home is getting some updates. Sometimes we're able to, with permission, do a Skype call on our phone or a FaceTime call or something so the parent can talk. Sometimes we're able to deliver a gift or a note from the parent. And so we're trying to get that connection and ensure the child's safe. Separately, we have cases where maybe the parent says, no, we don't know where the child is. In that case, we use our resources in country, including law enforcement. We work closely with, for instance, FBI, or our diplomatic security agents, to find these kids. We want to locate the children involved. If we get reports that there's really danger to the child and the parents, real concerns about what's going on, and the parents are not agreeing to our visit, or during a visit, if we observe something that's like, really, this isn't right, we will go to the local authorities, the local child protection authorities in that country, urge them to become involved in the case. We have cases, for instance, it's not that uncommon that during the pendency of one of these cases, the local authorities may take the child into protective custody. Now, no one wants to see a child living in a shelter for a long period of time or a foster home, but hopefully when that has to happen, it's happening because the child was in a dangerous situation where they were. The welfare of the child is always our interest. While this case is going on, while the efforts are made to return the child, we want to make sure the child stays safe. And whatever we need to do, working with the local authorities and our law enforcement to find and ensure these children are safe, we continue to do.
So if we look at the number of children who are reported abducted through the Office of Children's Issues over the past 10 years, that number has declined. I would like to know your opinion about whether that decrease in reported cases or number of children abducted from the United States is caused by an actual decrease in the number of international parental child abductions, or perhaps some other reason for instance, a lack of awareness that the Office of Children's Issues exists and that this is an agency that can report those cases.
The reported abductions, in terms of that number, that's the number of people who call either 888-407-4747 or contact us in some other way that were reported to us. That number has been declining. Last year, it was about 700. So I'm going to be talking about the outgoing, which outgoing meaning leaving the United States, reported to our office.
Okay.
And that number for the last couple of years that was slightly up over last year. I think it was high 600s last year. But you're right, it's down significantly from what it was when I worked in the office last time when I first arrived here, when it was up closer to, say, 1,500. Hopeful that is fewer children being put in this situation and there's fewer abductions, and that's my sincere hope. I hope that's the answer. But if the answer is that maybe people don't know to call our office, don't know of the resources we have or your organization has or other organizations that are trying to help families, I hope this interview helps to get that word out. I mean, we want to know what the problem is. We want to know which countries are the problem too. I mean, even if it's a difficult country and parents are saying, they're discouraged, that they don't feel there's much hope in calling, we want to know the extent of the problem so we can focus our efforts as well. So my fear is that there might be fewer, some of these drop in numbers, maybe because some parents aren't calling us for help. And it's why we do, through this interview and other outreach campaigns, try to keep that word out there that, call us, we can help. I'd like to highlight the fact that any child habitually resident in the United States who's abducted, we're here to help.
And when you say habitually resident, what does that mean?
That's not, I'm a lawyer, but that's not a legal term. It's just, did they live here? Was this really where they were living? And if they were living here, regardless of citizenship, regardless of legal status, regardless of the citizenship or legal status of their parents, whether they were here studying, whatever their status was, if there's a claim they were habitually resident here, we're going to assist that family and present that case.
And in general, habitually resident means 6 months or more, but it can differ by state.
No, it doesn't differ by state.
Okay.
And this is not really a set time frame.
Okay.
If there was a real intent to move to the United States and they packed up, moved all the stuff, sold the house in the foreign country, settled here, rolled the kids in school, got the cable TV, that's their habitual residence. They don't need to do that for 6 months necessarily to stay.
So if you were able to give advice to a parent seeking to prevent an international parental child abduction or whose child has been abducted overseas, if you could speak to that parent right now, what advice might you give them?
If you're starting to have the spidey sense feeling that this could go wrong, if you're starting to feel that I'm not so sure about this, call us, enroll your child in the Children's Passport Issuance Alert Program. I think another important thing to flag is many of these children have dual citizenships. So if they're a citizen of another country where they may be able to get a passport, then be reaching out to that country's embassy. We have information in our office what the rules are with the different countries, but I think it's important to reach out to those countries' embassies, express your concerns there. Different countries, again, every country's different, but some countries have similar type programs or have two-parent signature requirements or ways you can prevent your child leaving the United States on another passport. Think about where the passports physically are. Get those secured. Get those placed in the hands of a third party, maybe if the parents are in a dispute. The court order part, talk to a lawyer. That's if you don't have court orders in place that offer the kind of protections we talked about earlier with the Prevent Abduction Program, it's probably a good time to start talking to a lawyer. But, no one knows the life of that parent, that family better than those parents do. And if the spidey senses are triggering, it's time to do it. The important thing, too, is there's a thing called the Privacy Act, meaning if a parent reaches out to us and speak, I've had cases overseas where one parent called me and I talked to them for a while, hang up the phone, a few days later, another parent calls me, the other side. They're worried the other one's going to abduct the kid. And I talked to them for a while. Now, since they were both in the same country, the chances that since they were both worried about the child staying in country, I have a feeling that kid probably never got abducted. But regardless, I never told either parent that the other one had spoken to us. Absent the permissions, when they speak to us about their case, we're not going to share that with the other parent. If your child's already been abducted, it's already happened, or they've gone on vacation and they never came back, don't delay. I think it's really important to call us. And we have parents who call us sometimes and they're a little worried about the vacation, the flights for February 28th, and they're starting to hear weird things out of Brazil and they're just not so comfortable they're really going to get on the plane. Call us. Learn your options. We may not be able to really want to move forward till the 28th until we see if they get on the plane or not, but you can already be knowing what your game plan is on the 29th when your child doesn't get on the plane. When in doubt, call us. That's what we're here for. And start to take. But the delay is bad. I mean, the longest I can think of is a parent who called me 10 years after the abduction. Even though we're still going to try to help, we never turn away a case because of how long it's been. Age 16 is when the Hague Abduction Convention ends. So after age 16 on a Hague Convention case, we can no longer file the case. We aren't going to turn the case down because of a delay, but your chances of successfully securing a return from a foreign court in a Hague abduction case diminish significantly if you wait years or months and months to delay process in moving forward.
And equally, if you were to speak to an attorney representing a parent in either of the same circumstances, would your advice differ?
No, I don't think it would. I think it would be move forward.
Do you feel that the law enforcement and the legal community are well informed about the options that your office provides?
I think with the law enforcement community, I would say there have been improvements. For instance, the Sean and David Goldman Act laid out some requirements of us interagency cooperation on these issues. In the years that, like I said, I was in the office in the early 2010 to 14, and now I'm back, and I've seen an improvement. Our work with law enforcement, I feel like, is closer. We have these meetings are more robust. We get greater cooperation from law enforcement. But as you're aware, there are thousands of different law enforcement agencies in the United States. And so hopefully your programs and our programs will help to get the word out to all of these different entities. I mean, they may only see one or two cases in their jurisdiction in the next few years, but those are important cases, and we hope they know these resources exist.
If you could speak to a law enforcement officer about what steps they can take to either facilitate the prevention of an abduction were a case presented to them, but the parent had come to their local law enforcement officer, what advice could you give to that officer? And equally, if the officer had been presented with a parent who was claiming that their child had been abducted, what steps would you suggest that officer take?
It actually starts with the same answer I would give a parent or a lawyer. Call us. If they're presented with any scenario that involves a potential or completed parental child abduction, call us. As I mentioned earlier, we are essentially the lead on the civil side. There's a criminal side of these cases. Sometimes only one or the other is really appropriate, but more often the two work hopefully in a positive way together to get the same result. In other words, when I speak to police officers or district attorneys or U.S. attorneys or the people these cases could come to, I urge them to reach out and let us know when they're working on a case and make sure we're not stepping on each other, making sure we understand. We have many of these cases where we're working on the civil side with court proceedings at the same time a U.S. Attorney's Office or the FBI may be working on the case with arrest warrants and Interpol notices and other ways with their tools to try to find this family and secure this child. Another resource that's out there I do want to mention is the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. This is a fantastic organization that works on a number of issues related to children exploitation, but they have a whole unit that we work very closely with on family abductions, and they also have resources, and they're very connected to law enforcement community. And have their own programs. So it's just another way for law enforcement to get the resources they need. But I would urge law enforcement always to not hear the story and say, this doesn't feel like a criminal matter, we can't help. Because, parental child abduction is a crime in every state and federally, and they need to treat them as such and reach out to us to work on them.
So are there any success stories that you'd like to share or are able to share?
Again, as I mentioned earlier, for privacy, I can't obviously give names. And, we leave it to the families to share their stories if they want to share their stories publicly. And some families do, and some families want to forget and move on. And we understand that. I think it's important to acknowledge not everybody who calls us is going to be happy in the end. Sadly, sometimes it doesn't work. Sometimes the family doesn't get their child back. Sometimes the parents are not satisfied. But that doesn't mean they shouldn't call us. They shouldn't make the effort. And we will still fight for their kid to help them, even if it's in a country where the results historically have not been good. We're still going to make the effort, and I would encourage people to still try. But there are success stories. Families do sometimes get their children back. We cite certain countries every year for failing to comply with the convention. Well, here's a success story I can share. For probably a decade or more, Mexico was cited in our report year after year after year for non-compliance with the convention. And although Mexico, we have a lot of cases, we'll have hundreds going on at a time, and we would occasionally get a few returns. It was never significant. Numbers and such that we were not going to cite them. But starting in probably 2010, 2009 timeframe, they steadily improved. Our relationship with the Mexican Central Authority improved. I could say law enforcement to law enforcement cooperation, especially at the border, improved. And we have not cited Mexico in the compliance report for about 4 to 5 years. When I arrived in the office in 2010, we had close to 600 open abduction cases in Mexico. We now have, I believe, less than 100. So that overall has been a success story. Out of that, there are many families now who've gotten their kids back, especially in the last few years, that 20 years ago in Mexico case may not have gotten their kid back. And I think that's a success story. Even though there's some countries that are still cited in the report year after year after year, there are some countries that have made significant strides, and where we feel much more comfortable if a child, for instance, is abducted to Mexico today, and I think the country officer would start the conversation saying, don't lose hope. We see success here. Doesn't mean every case works well, but that's a success story.
Who can contact the Office of Children's Issues?
It's best if the parent themselves, or if they're represented by legal counsel, the lawyer can call us directly. Someone really, the parent or the lawyer really is the right person to call us. Having your neighbor call for you, we'll listen to the story, but we can't share all the details. Going through a third party who's not a lawyer makes it tough. Sometimes we have to do that, but for example, we have numerous Spanish speakers in the office. I think as a whole, we probably speak 40 or 50 languages in this office altogether. I speak Spanish. I could fumble through it in Polish. I also speak some French and some Bambara. So sometimes people will, it's fine if when they first call, if they've got their friend with them who's going to translate, but they may not need it. But please don't use a friend to call because they're afraid or they're worried about calling the government. The information stays with us, and it's best to go straight to the source and talk to the parent. Or again, if they've hired a lawyer who can speak 100% for them, that's fine too.
Now, if a member of law enforcement or a judge for any reason had a question, perhaps about what language might be necessary to establish the prevention in the Prevent Abduction Program, or a law enforcement officer had a question, someone said, I've heard about this program, you have to help me. Could the law enforcement officer or a judge reach out to this office as well?
Yeah, the law enforcement officer in particular could reach out to us directly. We don't generally hear from judges as much because the judge is doing it, has more formal procedures and how they communicate about cases. But law enforcement, absolutely. And we also, again, on the interpretation, we have a language line available to us. So even if we don't speak the language, as I was walking to my office a couple days ago, I heard one of our country officers using the language line to speak in Amharic, an Ethiopia abduction case. We didn't have an Amharic speaker, but we did through our language line, again, for free, no cost to the parent. We were able to have that conversation with that parent in their language.
Well, I thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you even more for your time and for doing this because we want to get the word out.
You hinted at your office's ability to facilitate seeking parents access to their abducted child abroad through the welfare and whereabouts visit. Are there other ways that you can assist a seeking parent in gaining conversations or other means of access to a child in the country to which they're abducted?
One is, in any case that's going on, often the judge, especially if a case is going to take some time, will make orders for interim access. Sometimes a person can just ask, while this case is going on, can I Skype with my kid? Can I get a supervised visit? The courts often will order that. So that's a way, since there's a case in front of a judge, for that local judge to say, I order you to, we'll say, while this case is going on, twice a week, Skype calls with the other parent or something. So that's one way. Separate from the case, under the Hague Convention, separately, a parent can also make a request for access. This is a separate legal request from a return request. But an access request is just, I want to have access to my child. It's best done in a case where there isn't other orders, where it's just my child's in this other country, whether they were abducted there or not. It could be a situation where the other parent moved to another country, not an abduction, and then cut off all contact. So it may not be a return case, but even in those situations, for our Hague Convention partners, we can accept an access application, we forward it to the Foreign Central Authority, They get in front of a court, and the court can make rulings regarding access for that parent. So parent wants contact with their child and return for whatever reason isn't going to happen, they can also work with us in the Hague Convention countries to get access to that child as well.